Hey everybody, how you doing? It's Max. I wanted to make a quick video since we're kind of on day 2 here of this new sort of reality for us, where we're holding our traditionally on-premise training for our HubSpot new hires. We're doing it completely remotely. And I made a post about this the other day, kind of celebrating what our team did to, put this all together very quickly and adapt the current training program that we had to be fully remote. And a lot of people on that post were saying like, hey, can you share some of the things that, you learned through this entire experience? I know we're only kind of 2 days into it, but I already have like a lot that I think would be like super helpful for anyone who's looking to take what is, traditionally an on-premise training that you may be doing for new hire onboarding and doing it completely virtual. And I know a lot of people are having to deal with this like pretty quickly because the situation that we're all living with, this new shared reality that we're all in, things are changing daily. So I felt like there was a little bit of a responsibility to try to get this stuff out sooner rather than later. So this video isn't going to be super polished. I just wrote down 20 different tips that I have that I want to share with you, and I hope it's helpful for at least someone watching this video out there that's trying to take their current new hire training that they have and adapt it into this new virtual work from home world that we're all living in. Cool. So I'm going to get right into it. Before I give you the 20 tips that I have here, I want to kind of tell you a little bit about our learning stack, if you will. So, some of the tools that we heavily rely on that make it really easy for us to deliver a great training, both in the classroom and online. So just a couple of the tools that we use. One, we used VYOND. VYOND is basically this video editing tool that allows you to create these really like fun cartoons. So, if you don't have the ability to like shoot live action with the camera to like make any sort of videos to get your point across or to teach someone or create these different scenarios, VYOND is a really great tool if you want to get a little bit creative and create some like fun cartoons. So for us, we have this fictitious company called Sprocket Saver that we use as an example company as, we tell the story of HubSpot and how customers interact with us and grow with us. And we have all these videos that introduce people to the company, show conversations that different customers are having, and it's much easier to be able to just create these videos and these scenarios, out of thin air using this cartoon maker, if you will, than it is to go out and like shoot something live action. So VYOND's a really great tool that we use. Also, we're like a Google business app shop, right? So we use Google Slides for all the decks that we do. We do a little bit of stuff with Google Docs. We also create a lot of e-learnings. We use a program called Rise. That's by a company called Articulate. They make Storyline. If any of you out there have ever built any e-learnings before, you may be familiar with that. Rise is an extremely accessible, very easy program to use to build e-learnings that are, pretty easy to get to no matter like what program you're using to deliver them. We also use Google Calendar. A really good calendar program is going to be, essential for anyone doing virtual training. So whether you're on Google Calendar or Office 365 or, some sort of equivalent, having something like that's definitely great. If you are selling some sort of software or you're walking someone through some sort of like process through a video that involves software, Camtasia is a really great tool to be able to create video screen capture walkthroughs of different tools. And you can do a lot of really cool things with them. But it's a video editing tool that's like purpose built for software walkthroughs. So definitely check out Camtasia. And then obviously like Zoom is the way that we facilitate all of our instructor-led sessions, virtually, as well as like any of the meetings that we have at HubSpot. So Zoom is fantastic. I highly recommend it. And of course, Slack or some sort of equivalent, business instant messaging service. Okay. So those are the tools that we use. All right. And I just wanted to kind of set that stage because a lot of the tips that I'm going to give you here do kind of interact with like the tools that we're using in some way. So hopefully that'll continue to be applicable for everybody. So tip number 1, one of the best things that you can do is making sure that you're easing into this, right? Any new hire onboarding experience can be extremely overwhelming, especially if you have a lot of information to cover. Like our program, we have a ton of information to cover. We have a limited amount of time to do it. So, it's very easy for training to get overwhelming. And when you compound that with the very intense living situation that all of us are under now, that makes it even worse. So make sure you're not like diving headfirst into anything too quickly and overloading people with too much information. Like, do your best to ease into it. So a good example of what we did is we held a virtual coffee session where we essentially just had the new hires like show up, and the very first like half hour of training was us just like checking in with each other, getting to know each other, introducing ourselves, showing off our different work from home setups that we had, doing a little bit of icebreakers, and just enjoying a cup of coffee in the morning, not getting too crazy, not talking about training or anything like that. So I thought that was really great. If you have larger groups, right? Sometimes here at HubSpot, we're training groups of up to like 50 people. If you're using Zoom to do these virtual coffee sessions, you can use this feature called breakout rooms. And breakout rooms are great. What they allow you to do is basically take a large, Zoom audience that you have and break them out into individual rooms. So what we did, since we had about 25 people in our class, we broke people out to these different rooms, and we had different members of our team like sit down and run conversations with people. That way it was a little less intimidating. Instead of talking to a group of 25 people, you were, paired with like 4 or 5 of them, you were able to have a much easier discussion that way, right? So tip number 1 is just like ease into it. Don't dive in too crazy at the beginning of the day. All right. Second tip that I have for you is like, not everybody is accustomed to doing new hire training completely virtually, right? This is a very new frontier for a lot of folks that, have never worked remotely in the past. Like all of a sudden now everyone's a remote employee. So if you are using Zoom or any other sort of web conferencing software, one of the best things you can do at the beginning is make sure that people are comfortable using the tools. So with Zoom, for example, show them how to virtually raise their hand. There's also like a yes, no green check mark and a red X that you can use if you're asking the class yes or no questions and you want to get a mass answer. Show them how to use the chat menu, or the chat window. Get them comfortable using the chat window, etc. So just make sure they feel comfortable using the communication tool that you're going to be using to deliver your virtual instructor-led trainings before you start diving into any of the subject matter. Because the thing is, they're not going to be able to retain the knowledge or truly listen if they're not comfortable in this like portal in which they're receiving all of this knowledge. So make sure they feel comfortable using whatever your web conferencing tools are. All right. The other thing I would recommend too, and this is easy to do if you're using Zoom, is make your sessions as interactive as possible, right? So a really cool thing you can do with Zoom is you can do polling, right? So something that I like to do like during, the beginning of like towards the end of like the first day or maybe the second day is I always like to check in with people just to see how they're feeling, right? And I make this like stupid, silly joke of like, hey, is anyone feeling overwhelmed? Is anyone feeling underwhelmed? How many of you are just whelmed, right? And people giggle, or sometimes there's someone who takes that or like they steal the punchline away from me. But like I always like to check in and see how people are feeling, just because that can help me gauge, am I going too fast? Is this information overload? Do they want more? Are they feeling good? Is the pace going good? And using a poll inside of Zoom is a great way to do that, right? But it's also just a great way to get feedback from your audience and involve people in the discussion and make it more interactive. The other thing you can do too to make those sessions interactive if you're using Zoom is the annotate feature, right? So you can actually let Zoom participants draw and write stamps and type letters on the screen. And if you set your, your slide decks up in a way where you set up some sort of slide and you ask people to interact with it using annotation, such as like circle the area that you think is correct, or write your name next to the correct answer, or write down some thoughts about XYZ, that just takes it a little bit of a step further. So instead of just like watching a talking head, they're actually interacting with the content they have in front of them, right? So do your best to make it interactive. Tip number 4, calendar events can serve as a great learning management platform if you don't have a formal one, right? So if you don't have some sort of, learning content storage area or learning management system like a Docebo or a Totara or a Moodle or any of those other LMS platforms out there, right? Use your Google Calendar or whatever your calendar program is to deliver that content, right? We got to think about it. When we're in the remote world, people are living and dying by their calendar. So they always have had their eyes on their calendar. Why hide any content that they need for training somewhere else when you can simply put it in the calendar event? So when you're thinking about the descriptions that you write for any of the training sessions that you're doing, you can include a ton of stuff in there so it's right there at their fingertips, whether it's a link to a document, a link to a video, a link to an e-learning that you have, right? Make it super easy for them to find what they need for that block of time that they're looking at, right? On top of that, if you are using Google Docs or Google Slides, right, a cool trick that I like to use to make sure someone can download their own copy of the slides is copy links. Now, the way you build a copy link in Google is you take the normal shareable link that you have, but you'll notice at the very end of the shareable link, it says /edit. Right? And if you send someone a link that still says /edit, what happens is they actually go into the original document that you're working on. The thing that's tough there is that you have to waste a lot of time telling that person, hey, go and hit file and then go hit make a copy and then make your own copy. You can skip all of that stuff if you remove at the tail end of that link the word edit and replace it with copy. And if they go to that link, hopefully right from a calendar event, they'll just be prompted to make a copy of that document. That way no one will mess around or screw with your master doc. They always get the most up-to-date version of it, and you don't have to hold their hand through how to make a copy of a document. All right, so definitely use copy links. Tip number 5 is make it very, very easy for them to just hop in and out of your virtual training environment, right? So something that I do with Zoom is instead of having individual Zoom meetings for every single one of our calendar invites for every single one of our sessions, I use one meeting ID, one single Zoom link that people go to. So no matter where they find that Zoom link, they're always popping into the correct room. You can create these things in Zoom called personal meeting rooms where you can choose what the meeting ID actually is. And what I've done is I've made my personal Zoom room my phone number. So my meeting ID is just my phone number, so I remember it. So if anyone asks me, oh, what's the Zoom room I need to join? I just tell them my phone number and they hop right into there. They don't know it's my phone number. Maybe now they do. Don't call me. Anyway, so use the same exact Zoom meeting for every single calendar event just so it's easy for people to join. You can almost think of it as like a TV channel that someone tunes into versus like an individual meeting, right? And it just makes things a lot cleaner. You can put the same link in all of your calendar events. It's super easy, right? Tip number 6, make sure you mix up the modalities. The last thing that you want is someone just sitting looking at a screen with a talking head just telling them information all day. That is one of the best ways to get people to just tune out. So mix up your modalities the best you can. Now, if you don't know what modalities are, that's just different ways to deliver learning, right? To keep it interesting. So you've got your virtual instructor-led sessions, which is like a facilitator leading a discussion or going through some sort of presentation, but you can also do different self-paced asynchronous e-learnings. You can do videos, you can do team challenges. Zoom breakout rooms are great for those. You can have unstructured self-paced workshop time if you're having them do some sort of project. Make sure you mix things up so it stays interesting, it stays fresh, and you keep them stimulated. Learners need to be stimulated, especially in a virtual environment like this where, they're just trapped in their room all day and it's very isolating. You don't want them to feel that way, right? So mix up your modalities as best you can. Tip number 7 is account for different time zones, right? If you're used to bringing everybody to your office and everyone is in the same place, you probably haven't had to worry about time zones before because everyone's there. They come at the same time. It's very easy, to kick off your trainings. But, since we're now in the remote world, essentially, we've all been tossed into this whether we like it or not, you need to account for, people on separate sides of the country or other sides of the world when you're doing these virtual trainings. So what we've done that I think has worked pretty well, we're going to see as it continues, but try to front load your asynchronous or your e-learning work at the beginning of the day and try not to do any of your live instructor-led sessions until the middle of the day. That way anyone, I'm on the East Coast, for instance, that way anyone on the West Coast, instead of me doing a training at 9 a.m. and them having to wake up at 6 a.m., what they can do is they can wake up later, right, and just do a little bit of e-learnings before that or even the night before, and then join the instructor-led sessions at reasonable times for everybody, right? So be very, very mindful of the different time zones that you have to work with. So tip number 8, if you are doing any sort of screen sharing, okay, where you are walking someone through a piece of software and you're expecting them to do the same thing on their end, you need to go slow. Okay. So you need to make it easy for people to follow along, because you have to remember that they're probably working on one screen. They may not have like a multiple monitor setup or anything like that. So you need to make it very easy for people to follow along with you. So what I always like to do is, like, as I progress through different pages of like a website or a tool or something that I'm walking people through, I always pause to make sure people are with me before we move on to the next point. The other thing that you need to do too is, like, you need to remember that some people are going to be uncomfortable speaking up when they get stuck, right? Because they don't want to, look like they're holding up the class or anything like that. So, what you need to do is you need to encourage people to know that it's okay if you fall behind or get stuck, and to verbally speak up when you do. All right. What I always do is I just tell people, like, hey, listen, I'm going to walk you through this as best as I can. But if you're seeing something different or you're getting stuck, don't feel afraid to come off a mute and say, hey, Max, stop. I need help. Right. That way you can keep everyone on the same page. You do a lot less hand holding later on, and you can all like move forward together. Right. So just go slow. Make people comfortable with telling you to stop. It's totally okay. All right. Tip number 9, don't feel like you need to reinvent the wheel. Okay. If you don't have to create all the content internally. You don't have to create 100% original content for your trainings. If you have a YouTube video out there, if you're teaching any inbound stuff, use the HubSpot Academy. If there's any other resources that your team uses that helps them in their job, make that part of your training, right? Include it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel and build it all from the ground up. Leverage existing resources wherever you can find them, okay? Let's see, 10. This is huge. Use a learner log. So I'm not going to show you, I'll show you right here what this basically is. So a learner log is basically a way where you can write down all the names of your participants and put little tallies and little check marks. I don't know if you can really see that. Put little tallies and little check marks next to people when they participate, right? Now, this is great because you can start to identify the people who are participating more in training, but also it helps you identify the people who are not. And that tells you who you should be calling on, so you're evenly engaging everybody throughout training, right? When you ask someone for their input in a training, that kind of tells them, oh, I better pay attention because I could be called on at any time. And for you to keep track of that, especially with larger classes, learner logs are going to be super helpful for that, right? It's way better to do this with paper and just have a pen and kind of write things down, just because like trying to fumble along with like, other tabs and windows when you're doing an instructor-led session like this is super hard. So I definitely recommend using good old paper and a pen to do your learner logs. All right. Cool. Tip number 11. If you're not passionate about a certain subject that you're teaching, tag in someone who is, right? It's very, very easy for learners to pick up over Zoom if you're not passionate about a subject that you're teaching. Okay. The camera's right in your face. They can read your body language like crazy. And if you're not super enthusiastic about what you're teaching, they're not going to be enthusiastic about it either. Right. So do some soul searching, ask yourself, am I the best one to deliver this material? If not, find someone who is super passionate about it. Trust me, it'll really, really help in the virtual environment. Tip number 12, try to involve the rest of the company, okay? You got to remember that your new hires are not the only ones that are remote. The rest of your team is probably remote at this point too as well. They're kind of stuck in their house or in their office in isolation just like everybody else. They need social interaction just like anyone else. So I would bet that more people on your team, especially these days, would welcome the opportunity to help welcome new hires to the company and be part of that experience, because they need some, excuses for social interaction during the day, because the amount that we get is definitely, at an all-time low at the moment. So definitely try to involve the rest of your team in your onboarding or training process, whether they're helping with like a virtual coffee, or they're playing some other role that's supporting you, or they're coming in as a subject matter expert. Give them opportunities to have some social interaction and kind of kill two birds with one stone. Okay, tip number 13. This is going to be a Google specific one, right? But if you're managing a ton of different employees and you're building out a lot of different calendar invites for your trainings, consider putting those employees inside of a Google group. That way you can add the Google group to a calendar event and it will show up on all those people's calendars. That's way better than adding people individually, especially if you have to move some things around or create new calendar invites. You don't want to have to go in, copy a whole ton of emails and move them around. Adding one single Google group that's going to include a whole bunch of people that are in it so it shows up in their calendars is a much easier way to do that. Huge shout out to Becca Stamp. She's the ops person on our team. I couldn't live without her. She figured out this awesome way of using Google Groups. So connect with her on LinkedIn if you want some tips on how to do that. She worked really closely with our IT team to make it happen. But you know, it's probably been one of the biggest innovations that we've had in terms of managing our calendar and making things a little bit easier. Tip number 14, have a really good pre-arrival communication strategy. Okay. So, you know, make sure you're communicating with your new hires before that first day. Send them an email with all the things that they need to know in terms of like, what's the Zoom meeting link that you have to join? If you haven't used Zoom, how do you download it? Try to partner with your IT team as best you can to get them their computers and get everything set up before training starts. Something really cool that we did is before our orientation day kicked off, we had our IT team hold like an open office hours like tech issue session where people could join if they were having any issues setting up their technology. That way, all that stuff was out of the way and they were able to enjoy orientation day tech issue free because you were able to get all that stuff fixed at the beginning before you even started. So that's kind of like a dual little tip right there. Really good pre-communication strategy. Get your IT team involved. Hold some sort of like office hour before training starts just so you can get all that stuff out of the way. All right. Tip number 14, try to have like your first day just act as an orientation day, right? You don't have to dive super deep into the subject matter on the first day. That is extremely overwhelming, right? And you know, again, we got to remember we're already working in a new frontier. Like a lot of these people aren't used to working remote. So getting used to working remote is one thing, and then information overload is another. And when you put those two together on the first day, it's pretty much a recipe for disaster, right? When you think about your orientation day or whatever your first day of your training experience is, your main goal should be to make sure those people are logging off at the end of the day, reaffirmed that they made the right decision to join your company. Okay, you just need them to walk away saying, I'm glad I made that choice, right? And even though we're under some crazy circumstances right now, you know, I feel good about the decision I made to join this company. That's all you can ask for from the first day, okay? You don't need to overload them with information. That can come in the subsequent days after, all right? So try to set up some sort of orientation day experience that welcomes them, makes them feel included, and reaffirms their decision to join your company. Tip number 16, this kind of goes back to like involving the rest of the company. If you're using a product like Zoom or WebEx or some sort of conferencing software, try to get another coworker or maybe another trainer or just someone who's, you know, happy to help out to serve as like the producer role. Now, what the producer role does, they're the ones that like monitors the chat, helps people who are having technical issues, raises questions to the presenter if they don't see them, and just kind of helps with a lot of the stuff that would cause the facilitator to slow down and interrupt the session. So consider having someone come in and play the producer role. They'll be sort of like the wingman to the presenter and make sure everything goes smooth, and they're there for any sort of issues that arise to ensure the training, you know, continues in a smooth manner. Tip number 17, if you're using Slack or HipChat or, you know, any sort of instant messaging software inside your business, try to set up a channel or a group for your specific new hire cohort. All right. It's really important that that group of new hires, like, not only like gets to know the rest of their teams that they're going to be working on, but also forms a close bond with the people that they're going through this experience with. Just because one, you know, that's a great way to, network and have really great lasting relationships and build connections with other areas of the company. But two, like, again, we're all in this together. So you may have some people that are great at working remote and some people that aren't great at working remote. They can share tips and tricks. They can talk to each other. They can stay in touch. They can study together. They can answer questions together. They can learn how to work as a team. So try to give them their own space where they can kind of communicate as a team together and work as a new hire class, jointly, right? Tip number 18. Things will go wrong, like from a technical perspective, especially if you're doing any sort of like heavy walkthroughs of software, or maybe you have a session that is like involves a lot of discussion and sometimes, maybe you go over time, whatever it is. When you're thinking about how you're planning your breaks throughout the day, consider adding like maybe larger breaks behind some of the beefier sessions that you have. So you give yourself a little bit of a buffer time that you can bleed into should you need to keep the conversation going, or maybe something goes wrong that like delays the specific session or training ending on time. So build in time for, buffer time. And hey, if you don't use that buffer time, you're giving people some well-deserved break that they can go do, or they can work on something else as well. Tip number 19, I think this is a really important one. Not only is everyone, that's probably going through your training now going to be remote, you have to remember, like, if they're a caretaker or a parent, their kids or family members are probably home as well. Okay. So like, it's one thing to have a virtual training where like you can join from anywhere, but it's a whole nother thing to be flexible for those people. All right. So when we think about instructor-led like live sessions, maybe before you do these trainings, and like this is also just a really good way to practice, create like a high quality Loom recording or some other video recording of you going through the session as if you're just talking to one specific learner, kind of like I'm doing right now. That way, like, if you do have remote employees that can't make a session because, maybe they don't have childcare right now, or they have a parent or someone who's sick at home, or, there's something that stops them from attending that, session because, it's not just them, being remote. They have to care for a lot of other people. Make it so it's flexible, right? If they can join it, great. That's awesome. But if something comes up and you can't join the live session, I've got a high quality recording that you can watch and you can send that along, right? So be flexible. There's a lot more going on in these people's lives, especially now. Just because they're remote, it doesn't mean they have all the time in the world. They've got a lot of other things going on, and we have to be cognizant of that fact. All right. My last tip here is seek professional help. All right. I got to be honest, like I was not comfortable at all doing virtual instructor-led trainings until I had a professional come in and tell us, the right way to do it. So what I want to do right now is I want to give a shout out to Catherine Nicholson. She is a trainer from this company called the Virtual Training Team, and she came in and delivered a masterclass. It was like 3 hours, a masterclass for our team here on how to do really effective virtual instructor-led training. Okay. This was like a 3-hour course that we did. I have to admit, when I first saw it go on my calendar, I was like, oh my God, a 3-hour training. I'll tell you right now, I have never, ever been more engaged in almost any training that I've ever gone through than Catherine Nicholson's virtual instructor-led training session. It was absolutely amazing. I highly recommend anyone watching this video that's looking to skill up their team to be able to deliver virtual instructor-led training to reach out to her, because she is absolutely fantastic. I wasn't comfortable at all doing virtual instructor-led trainings before her session. At the end of her session, I was like, hey, I'm praying for a snow day to be able to put all these skills into practice. And funny enough, the cohort we had after, we had a snow day on the busiest day of training. And, I was able to go from 0 to facilitating an entire day of 6 virtual instructor-led training sessions with over 50 people in it. And I had an absolute blast. And I couldn't have done it without, the skills that Catherine Nicholson and their team kind of passed on to us. So I highly recommend you all reach out to her if you want to bring in some of the big guns and get your team skilled up super quick on this stuff. All right. But hey, that's, 20 little tips that I have. I hope that's helpful for someone out there. I know we're all, we might be navigating some tricky waters here that we didn't anticipate, or didn't really plan for. But, I hope this helps. If you have any other questions or, need any other advice, I'm more than happy to help. I've got a wonderful team of trainers here that all love doing this stuff too as well. I can certainly get their perspective. So just drop a comment, anything. We're all in this together. Okay. So it's a great opportunity for us to all like share a ton of great tips and, get through this together. All right. Godspeed to everybody out there. Hope this helps, and train away.